All right, I do recognize some faces from SWAT here. Was anybody at SWAT this past August? Anybody see the guy who won the big lathe?
No.
He's a good friend of mine in our club. He's still a good friend of mine.
Yeah.
He knew how much I really, really wanted that lathe.
Yeah, me too.
Well, he bought this shirt right along with me. And at the first meeting we had after SWAT, he showed up in that shirt with a yellow sticky note over the I'm that says, I was. He's still my friend. So, yeah, that was tough. Okay, Femispheres. This is a femisphere. Mathematically speaking, it is similar to a, what are those strips? Mobius strip, in that from a topological standpoint, my wife's a mathematician, I can say that, it has one side. If you were to roll a golf ball around the outside of this, it comes back to the same place you start. It's considered to be a one-sided object.
That's an optical illusion, right?
An optical illusion? Yeah. You can call it that if you wish, but my wife is a math professor. Many years ago at our Christmas party, one of our members found this on the internet and was making them at the party. My wife happened to come to that party. She doesn't usually come. She saw this, she said, you will learn how to do this. She supported my woodworking habit, but that day she was demanding my woodworking habit. And I've made a lot of them. And I really enjoy them. They're fun to do. From a turning standpoint, it's entirely between centers. You turn something that resembles a top, pull it apart, twist it, put it back together again. So you turn it as two pieces. So there is a seam. There's actually 4 seams here, because this is actually 4 different pieces of tulip wood glued together. When you do it in multiple pieces, especially when you do it in multiple species, it hides the seam. Because there's a lot of seams, but there's only one that really matters. This one was fun. It's probably also about the most expensive one of these I've made. This color ply stuff from Woodcraft is rather expensive, and I needed 2 blocks of it to pull this off. This is like a $60 Femisphere. Here's one out of Corian. I have done one out of Corian. I will not do another one out of Corian. But nice thing about Corian, in a sense, is that there's no grain. So I could cut a what would be on the bias, except that there really is no bias with Corian, and not waste nearly as much material. The downside is there's no grain to this stuff. Teeth of the drive center will not bite into this. Femispheres are held together when you're turning them with double stick tape. Pressure has to be applied. The points have to be on the seam, which is exactly where you don't want pressure. And you don't want it on stuff that has no give to it at all. This thing flew apart on me I don't know how many times. I worked on this thing for 3 days before I finally got it and decided one was enough. It also weighs more than most of these over here. I last did this demo for the Fort Worth Club in July. I was trying to get this one done before the demo, but I ran out of time. So 3 days afterwards, I was finishing it up at home. And I had just told the people in Fort Worth that I use double stick tape to hold these together, because if it ever does start to come apart while I'm turning it, it tends to peel rather than just go all at once. So suddenly, when it's not round, you step out of the way, turn it off, and you're all right. So what happened 3 days later? This blew apart all at once. I was standing right in front of it. Don't wear no stinking face shields. Those are for beginners, right? It hit me in the face, tore open a piece of my cheek, left a piece of wood in my glasses. I've never seen that much of my blood at once. I was home alone, and it was kind of scary. I ended up going to the emergency. It was a Sunday, of course. Go to the emergency room. Nurse starts to clean me up, and she starts picking at it. And what are you doing? She says, "What color wood were you working with?" It was walnut, so it's dark brown. And she pulled a piece of walnut out of my face that I did not know. I must admit, it felt a little better after she did that. So, guess what I'm going to be wearing tonight? I've been using that a lot more lately. There are some special cases. And now that I'm up here, I can't remember the guy's name. Stephen something. Guy has a book on twisted objects. Book and video. This is a variation of a femisphere, done basically the same way. A spindle turning that's two pieces, pull it apart, twist it, glue it together. This is just pine. I don't find these terribly interesting, so I haven't done any more of those. On the internet, I saw a picture of one of these. And I thought, I know how they did that. That's pretty awesome. I want to make one of these.
Could you put it down?
Oh, sure. Does that work? I have no idea what this is called. It was just a photograph on Pinterest. So that what you're turning is a cone with a half sphere on it. You turn, pull it apart, twist it, put it together again. It turns out the tolerances for this are much, much higher than for a femisphere. With a femisphere, all the curved surfaces, if things don't line up when you twist it, you sand it smooth, everything's curved, nobody can tell. Not so with one of these. This proved much harder to do, but I like it. And I thought, wouldn't it be really cool if the cone and the sphere were different species? The more I thought about that, the worse it got. I've been asked about a demo for this, and I just don't know that I ever could. This one made me cry. This is a southeastern burl, Aphelia burl, I believe, and ebony. So this was pretty darn expensive, and it came out perfectly. And I was buffing it. The buffing wheel caught it. It sailed out of my garage, hit the car, landed on the concrete, and so it's dinged up in a few places. I just wanted to cry. But if you look at it from a distance, right, it looks great, right? This is another special case. These objects, these are femispheres, but they belong to the larger family called sphericons. And this is simply referred to as a sphericon. I made this out of pine, which is why the ends are broken. This provides some chucking challenges because you have to turn this down to a point so there's nothing left to hold on to anymore. So this came out, it was okay. I don't think it's very interesting. This is the only one I've done. But it's the same concept, just with the sides cut straight instead of curved. And one thing a femisphere will do, femispheres always roll in a straight line. Always. They wobble back and forth as they do it. Let's see if I can do this without dropping it on the floor. But it will always roll in a straight line. Okay, move over here. So here's what we're going to turn. Here's our center line. And turn something that looks somewhat like a top. Let's see how well I can. I'm going to turn something that looks like that. The pieces are glued together at this point. We have to have some waste wood on this end for the, on both ends actually, for the centers. The key to turning a successful femisphere is symmetry. Everything must be symmetric, or when you pull it apart and twist it, it doesn't line up. If it doesn't line up, it doesn't look like a femisphere. In theory, you can make this shape anything you want, as long as you do not protrude past the blue line. Oh, that is not too bad. Everything you cut has to be symmetric across the green lines. So if you decide to get real crazy over here, this must be the mirror image of this. This must match this, because we're going to pull it apart and twist it, and if those don't line up, it's not going to work. And I will tell you, after trying it, if you try to get fancy and put in grooves, I tried one with a square groove, just to have a groove that would loop around. Cut one like that. I cut a template that had that in the right spot so that I would get it in exactly the same spot on this side, and it still did not line up. And when you make them curved like I do, and I guarantee you there's not one of those that I did not have to sand the seams when I was done, because it didn't line up. But the error was so minor that no one can tell. You cut a square groove and twist it over here, and it doesn't line up. There is no amount of sanding that's going to make a square groove look like a continuous square groove. So I tried that precisely once and realized that I'm no good at that. This distance here is arbitrary. As long as it is some non-zero value, but keep in mind that the width here is going to be the width here. So if you're trying to make it a real nice, fine, tiny edge, you're going to be holding it by that very same edge over here, which is also going to be held together with double stick tape, and you're forcing a point in between. So don't get carried away. All right. All right, so what I have here, just to prove that I spared no expense whatsoever in performing this demo, this is genuine Home Depot 2x4. And I demo these with pine for several reasons. When I'm rough turning these things, that's largely when they start to come apart. You know, because it's got square edges, they're bonking against the tool. So I go very slowly. I take very light cuts when I round these. And that's not exactly the stuff of an interesting demo, watching me round one of these. But once I do get it round, I can be a bit more aggressive in getting the shape right. With hardwoods, I have to go pretty slowly because I keep having to increase the tailstock pressure, and that's something you really don't want to do too much of when it's held together that way. So with the pine, I can be fairly aggressive, and you don't have to sit through me doing too much of that.
Are they about 4 or 5 inches long?
The size can be anything. I have these templates, these quarter circle templates for the various sizes I've done. I do these in millimeters to make the math easier. I've done them from as small as 24 millimeters to one that's 62. This is the biggest one I've ever done. I've done one of them. As I said, my wife is a math professor. The president of the university, she works at Southwestern University in Georgetown.
And her name is Teresa.
And her name is Teresa.
I know her.
You know her?
He's a math professor.
Well, that's awesome. Okay, that's cool. Are you guys are probably familiar with Austin College, right? In Sherman. My oldest daughter just graduated from there in May. There's a tuition exchange program between Austin College and Southwestern University. They're both small liberal arts colleges. So my daughter got to go there for free. Well, tuition was free. Everything else they reamed us for, but the tuition was free. So I have these.
Is she going to be a mathematician too?
No, she is not. She got her degree in art. So when I make these templates, I've discovered that it's really good to make them out of plastic. Whoop, this just fell off. I had started making them with cardboard. Is that working? No, it's not. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. I started out making these with cardboard. Okay.
It's okay.
All right.
Sorry.
Guess I should have worn the different ears tonight. I tend to hold these against the Femisphere when it's spinning because I'm too lazy to switch it off all the time. And that kind of wreaks havoc with the cardboard templates. So we bought a new car a few years ago. This is a piece of the plastic license plate that comes on there. Stuff is wonderful. I got 2 of them off that car. And then my daughter bought a car this past summer, and I got 2 more. So these are great. So I still have some that are made of cardboard, but I'm making a lot of them out of plastic. I did this with acrylic. It was black acrylic. And I discovered with it being black, when I held it against there, I couldn't see the gap. So I covered them with paper on both sides, but it made a really thick template, which doesn't sit in there as well, so I'm not sure I like those. The license plate plastic is the best. If you get old credit cards, especially the ones that are not embossed, the embossed ones, the embossing gets in the way. But the newer ones, particularly the ones that don't have a magnetic stripe, like hotel room keys. If you have the electronic ones where we just hold it up to a sensor, those are great. I've discovered that if you don't voluntarily give them up at the desk, they don't ask for them. I've brought several home that way. If they ask, I give them, but usually they don't. And so I've gotten some that way, which is really nice. Here is one that does still have the magnetic strip in it from a card that came, or credit card or something that came in the mail. And eventually, I've discovered that the magnetic strips are done in layers. That'll start to peel. So that's not the best thing to use. Okay, so you can start with like a single block of wood, bandsaw it, or these were actually from a single board. I just cut 2 pieces, put them together. Since you need waste on both ends, you want the width to be inch and a half longer than the height is going to be. With this 2x4, this distance is about 3 inches. And that's as round as we're going to get. So this is bigger than 3 inches, where we're going to lose all of this. We're going to end up with something that's about 3 inches in diameter. So this is about 4 1/4, 4 1/2, because I need some waste wood on either end. The 2 faces that go together have to be absolutely, positively dead flat. These I use my jointer on. If you don't have a jointer, you can use sandpaper. Put sandpaper on something really, really flat, piece of glass or something. Mark it up with a pencil. Get it as flat as you can, because you do not want any gaps at all, or it kind of destroys the look of the finished product. So to start, we need to find the center finding ruler. It's very handy for this. Right about here. Now, if you're working with rough wood, a couple of pieces of a branch or something, then this becomes more of an issue. With 2x4, it's not that big of an issue. But I've discovered that you're much better off marking the center of one piece and then transferring that dimension to the other one, rather than marking this, measuring the center of the other side and assuming that those centers line up. Because if your blocks are not cut exactly the same, then they don't line up really well. So I transfer the marks on both ends. I mark the center line on these. The only real reason to do that is a sight line for the notching, which I'm going to show you just a minute here. There's really no other reason to do this. Saw a video on YouTube. Somebody had a good idea for notching these. You want to notch them ahead of time to make sure that the center points actually go on the seam. If they drift either side of the seam, you lose the, what's the word? The symmetry. You lose the symmetry, and it doesn't work very well. Cutting relief notches helps it not to blow apart. It won't prevent it from blowing apart, but it will help. It's not as much of an issue with this really soft pine because the tips will dig in. But if you're doing something that's really hard, then it can be a problem. Don't notch this too long into your finished product. That's all I'm going to say about that. Yes. Yeah, this is simply to give the center points a place to go and a bit of relief so they don't pry the blank apart much. They still will, but not as much. So can you see what I'm doing? Okay. So when I had the one blow apart on me, I think I was telling the guys in the club what had happened. One of them says, well, you know that stuff has a shelf life, right? I said, no, I actually didn't know that. I found out that I had been using one roll of this for years. You can make a lot of Femispheres with a roll of tape this big. And I had probably not even used half of it. And yeah, I had it for a number of years. And that's when I decided I needed to get a new roll.
What's the maximum thickness on that adhesive that won't impact your surface?
I don't know what the thickness is. I do acknowledge that technically it's going to create a difference, but you're never going to see it. I have tried using CA for this. The CA gives all at once with no warning at all. Thankfully, I didn't have it spinning real fast, and they just fell. They just broke apart, came apart, fell on the lathe. A paper joint could be good. The problem is getting all the residue off. You have to get absolutely all of it off without taking off any of the wood. And I keep going back. I've tried several different things, and I keep coming back to the tape.
Make sure you cover the complete surface.
Yes, sir, I do.
Just strips with it.
In fact, there's always an overhang here. This is pressure-sensitive tape. If you can see this on the camera. I'll just hold it still. You tell me if, do I need to move it? Spec tape. It's pressure-sensitive tape. I need to write a date in here as to when I bought it so that a few years from now I'll know I need to replace it. So it is pressure-sensitive. So I apply some pressure on the first layer. Cut off the excess. You can leave the excess if you want. Turning it will make it go away. And then I can pass this around if anybody wants to see it. I don't need it anymore. Yeah. Do you know I did that when I demoed it at Temple? I passed it around and didn't realize until later that it never came back.
We're honest.
Well,
That's
Well, that's true.
okay. Let's put these together. Like I said, this is pressure sensitive. So I clamp these up for about a minute or so. Set it aside for a while. Only about a minute or two. I don't even know for certain that the time is necessary, but I do it anyway. Now, through the magic of television, we end up with this. I round them ahead of time because, as I said, when I'm turning these, I go very slowly. And if it's going to, a lot of times when it comes apart, it's when it's still square. So the other advantage is that I already know the diameter, and I already know that I have a template that'll fit it. So, another good reason to do that ahead of time. Any questions so far in preparing the blank?
You know the diameter, what is it?
Say what?
You said you knew the diameter, what is it?
The overall diameter is 72 millimeters.
The template is?
Huh?
So the template then would be,
Yeah, I'm going to get what I have here. I've chosen, both of these are done with a thickness of 6 millimeters. I always choose an even number because I'm cutting on either side of the center line. 3 millimeters on either side of the line. Bigger ones, this is probably 8, might even have been 10. It's a pretty good size. As I say, the size is really arbitrary. You just don't want to get it to be too small. You can make it pretty big and to have just a small curve on the outside. It'll still roll just like any other Femisphere, just have a much thicker edge. So, it's time for some math. When you turn this into a cylinder, the only real reason to turn it into a cylinder is to find the center line. Because all that really matters is right in the middle. The rest of it can be whatever shape. The middle needs to be round. Measure that, and I know that this is 72 millimeters. But what we need is the radius. So we divide this by 2. 36 millimeters. And I will say, whenever I turn one of these, if it comes up to an odd number, I shave it down. Because none of my templates work with half millimeters. So if this, in fact, I think this one did come out to 73, and I shaved it down to 72 so my templates would work. So 36 millimeters, and I arbitrarily decide I want a 6 millimeter thickness, which is 3 millimeters on each side. So if you subtract 3, so my template is 33 millimeters. Radius, yes. 33 millimeters. There is another video on YouTube, guy doing a Femisphere, where he goes through a lot of trouble marking not just the middle, but the right side. You really don't need to do that. The template takes care of that for you, and I'll show you that. Okay. So once again, we need to find the center, which I should do before I mount it, because there's no room with the headstock in the way. So there we have the center. Ah, thank you. Thank you. All right. So to mark the center line, and then mark 3 millimeters on either side of it.
So since you have excess on